Hey, this is Pete A. Turner from Lions Rock Productions and the host of the Break It Down Show. Today's episode is a special one because it features Dr. Ledet and my work on the method called action research, which is a methodology we used in Afghanistan. We write about it in an academic peer-reviewed paper. And because people don't typically read peer-reviewed papers, we thought we would put together an episode to flesh out the idea in a more entertaining and interactive way. We were fortunate to get Will Hardy, who wrote the first military-based action research paper on how to do things in Afghanistan. Our work is subsequent to his and by design. So I decided it'd be cool to have Will come on and be our host since he's a leading expert in this field. So it's Rich, myself, and Will, who've all been on the show before, and we're talking about action research. So this won't sound like combat, but you have to understand modern combat to win. And this is modern combat. How we listen, how we ask, how we get out of the way of our partnered nation. These are critical things if we want to win overseas in conflict zones. So this paper establishes more footing in action research, which traditionally has been a method used in the education field. And we'll cover that a little bit in the show. Will talks about what he and his co-host did to establish an academic beachhead for this. Let me explain this process real quick. When you write an academic paper, you have to adhere to the current literature that's out there. And so when you bring in a new idea, there's really three things an academic paper does. It either establishes new ground, it expands that new ground, sort of like what we're doing with Will's paper, or it challenges an existing thought. So those are the basic things that are out there. These papers, the action research field, are so innovative that it's hard to get them published because someone will say something like, that's a decision-making model, not a methodology. But in fact, it is a methodology. There's an actual journal for it, and our paper will be published in that journal. So it's Action Research Journal for the methodology of action research. That is what we're doing in this episode. I think it's going to be interesting for you guys just to hear kind of how we go about this. For those of you who listen a lot, you'll recognize a lot of the things that we talk about. Sorry for the long intro. We don't want to be cocky. We want to be part of the conversation. So please, by all means, if you get this and you're an academic person, let's talk. We'd love to get more about it. And everybody else, thank you so much for listening. As always, I really appreciate you. Help me out by signing up wherever you listen. Subscribe, rate, review. Do those things. Let me know. Post pictures. Tell me your thoughts. All those things help us. Thank you. And now, here's Rich, Will, and myself talking about action research.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Hello, this is Dr. Richard Ledet down here at Troy University. The views I am about to express are my own. They are not the views of my university. And you are listening to The Break It Down Show.
And now, The Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
Yeah, The Break It Down Show, proud to present another one of Rich's and my academic papers. And we are very fortunate to have a guest host who's going to actually be the host by himself, and I will be one of the guests. And that, of course, is a multi-time Break It Down Show guest, Will Hardy. And the reason why he's hosting is because our academic paper is basically in a part two to his paper. So I'm going to get out of Will's way and let him do my job, and then I'm going to shut up and be a good guest.
All right. Thanks, Pete. Rich and Pete, you guys have an article that's in press about to come out in the Action Research Journal, which is a peer-reviewed journal, and you're breaking new ground as far as the academic community and applied action research type activities. So I wanted to first start out and have you, Rich, explain what is action research and how have you used it?
Well, action research is it's a participatory methodology. I mean, that's your textbook definition. It's a problem-solving methodology, though. And what you do is once you've identified a problem, it's a cyclical process. There's 4 steps involved, and I'm sure we'll talk about those steps as we go forward. But what it does is it enables you to build off of some assumptions that you have going into a situation. You need to find a solution to a problem. And the thing that I find beneficial about this methodology is that it allows you to reflect on what you've done, and that reflection period helps you test your own assumptions. And that I found really helpful. That's to say, the testing of the assumptions part. I found it really helpful working with Pete in Afghanistan, because a lot of times we make assumptions about our environment that are underinformed or simply false. So as we were working with the Afghans to try to develop governance, that's what this paper is about. We use this methodology to understand local customs and culture, to understand how those informal aspects fed into the governance of the district that we talked about in this paper. So how's that? It's pretty convoluted, but does that work? I think that was one sentence.
That's awesome. Allow me to kind of summarize that. You hit on a key point: participatory, which is unlike normal research.
Yes.
Because normally researchers hands off, and the research topic is the subject being studied. But within action research, it's almost practitioner that's being studied and changing the behaviors of how you're going about doing your activity based off of the subject. So as you're working with the district governor, you're not shaping him, you're shaping yourself, which in turn shapes him.
Yeah, it's like Hunter S. Thompson's style of journalism. It's gonzo social science.
So within action research, how did you come to use it with the military? And then what was the initial reaction when you first brought this idea up?
I don't even know that the military was concerned about the methodologies that we used. I don't know, Pete, what do you think? You might be able to help me out with this. We were doing this. We had a lot of flexibility, I guess. We had a lot of leeway in how we did our mission. I mean, my commander told me to help him figure out how to make the government work. And I don't think he was necessarily concerned about how I did it, but if I could get him some information and help inform his decision-making process, he would accept the final result. So methodology was never in question. I never really got any pushback from this. Maybe Pete has a different take on this.
Part of that, the answer to that question goes back to my time in Iraq. Keep in mind that I've done this work quite a bit, and I learned the pattern of speech required to gain access into a unit. So by the time I get to Afghanistan, I had already battle tested my plan through 4 or 5 different battalions that had rotated through in my ability to win the trust and confidence of colonels. So when I took it to Afghanistan, I'm like, now I have the black belt. Let me show you how I can do this. And so the colonel's like, hey, I'll take all the black belts I can get, and was glad to give us leeway. But again, when I'm on a new team that's already established, which really was a new thing for me, because most of the time I fell in on where I was the established team. And there was a social scientist there that wasn't familiar with my style and had a running plan. And I said, I'm not doing your plan. I know what to do. And he insisted on me reading a teammate who had left, reading their research program for the area I was going to go to. And I said, I'm not reading that. I'm going to go out. And this isn't to be ignorant or to put down anybody's work, but I knew what I needed to do already. I didn't need a plan. My job was to know nothing, go in and start understanding and answering questions that people hadn't asked yet. So that's how I got to the action research thing. I didn't know I was doing action research. Like Rich said, I was doing gonzo anthropology. but that is the reality of it. Was I knew enough to not put my plan into anything, because my plan would instantly... And you're going to make this mistake no matter what. I have to say that. Like, I learned this by making the mistake over and over again. I was aware that my influence was constantly more than I accounted for. And unless I was very careful in how I did things, my plan would inject into what I was doing. But the participatory nature of it required that I did as little of that mistake making as possible.
Well, yeah. And Pete, the other thing that I would add is, I mean, you might say you didn't know you were doing action research, but you were actually doing another involved in another another methodology, the OODA loop,
Right.
because the action research overlaps quite a bit with this idea of the OODA loop. And I mean, that's something that a lot of military personnel are versed in as well. So I think what you were doing was intuitive.
Yeah, that's the key thing. Anytime I've been talking about action research with the military, is that it basically is the guess and check way of problem solving. You take an action, you plan it out, you put it into motion, you observe, you reflect upon what you were doing, and then you get back right into the cycle, which is extremely similar to the OODA loop. So for anybody not familiar with OODA loop, OODA is OODA. It's observe, orient, decide, act. And it's just a quick decision-making cycle where action research might be, it can be quick like the OODA loop, or it can be more methodical and slowly thought out.
I think that part is what really makes the action research model. And really, it's sort of, if you were to take it and just use OODA loop as an example, it's more decide, act, observe, orient as your path. So when you go out into a combat zone, I got marching orders from the colonel. He's like, these are my basic questions. Why won't the Afghans take our help when we have these programs for aid? Why does the Taliban engage us in the evening in gunfights at a distance that they can't harm us and we really can't harm them? Like, help me understand these things. And so that's really all that's in my backpack in terms of a plan is how do I start to understand that? Everything else is what I call tabula rasa. Like, it's just a blank slate. I don't want to know anything, so I can start where the work is. And in this case, the governor wasn't even present. It was the district chief of police. And so I went trying to understand who they were. And so that's the anthropological method. Yeah, I'm sitting in there with them. I'm interacting with them. I'm asking questions. But that's how you start to understand what's possible for them to do. And then you couple that, in this case, with what's possible for the Army to not do. Because I was associated with the Army in this case. Because the Army will always overdo. So how do I get them to do less? And how do I figure out what the Afghans actually can accomplish?
What type of question? You briefly mentioned that you went in and your tabula rasa and you just wanted to understand who they were. What outcome did you and your supported unit have? So was it something like they want to facilitate better relationships between the Americans and the Afghans, between the Afghans and other Afghans? How did you and your supported unit approach what kind of thing they were trying to improve with action research?
So this district was a big part of the brigade push for the entire province. And so they were trying to put as much effort into this as possible and get ahead, get as many wins stacked up going into the the winter, the non-fighting season as possible, and then try to work through the winter to hold those wins was one of the directions that Colonel Stewart gave me. He was the battle commander in that area. And so as I looked at that and trying to understand how to support them with that, they were also simultaneously trying to open a road from the district to the main part of the province. That road was dominated primarily by the Taliban, and it had been opened unsuccessfully by previous units, which I knew, but apparently the unit didn't know. So it's like, okay, we've done this wrong before. What are we missing? And then do I even need to mess with that? Because if it's all hands and they're all doing that, well then, unless my hands are useful there, I'm going to do something else. So I'm trying to figure out how to support the unit with that. And then they're also trying to figure out governance out there. So the governor won't go out there. He won't fill his billets for aid and help around him. That was a critical thing. Fill the Tashkil was a mantra for a lot of the units in Afghanistan. What kind of capacity did the governor actually have? Because the perceptions of him were very low because he was associated with the Taliban. He was this problem, he was that problem, and he wasn't going to the district to do his job as a governor. So those were sort of like the big overlying problems that are undermining the unit's successful mission. And so we were all trying to figure out how do we deal with that.
And there's also a lot of time that has to be spent. getting to know this particular leader, and that's also an aspect of the participatory side of this methodology is, Pete wasn't up there governing. Pete was up there observing how someone was governing. And at the same time, there's these development projects that are happening, and there's multiple development projects going on at the same time. But the methodology actually allows you to, wait a minute, we've been doing this over and over and over again. What can we learn before we do it again?
Yeah, that's a great point to highlight, is when you're participatory, it's not that you are just there, it's that you are having an influence. And so just by Pete being in the same room with the district governor, he was changing that district governor's behaviors.
Yes.
So by being participatory, as opposed to traditional research where you are behind glass and observing, it enabled Pete to make changes, make corrections. If he makes a comment and recognizes that the governor did not like that, well, a minute later, he can try a different action and see if the governor smiles, kind of thing. Tiny loop with relationships, or it can be big loop with how do we make this road happen through the governor.
Yeah, the interaction with the governor, as you said, was that. And also, I'm simultaneously doing the same thing with my military partner on the American side. So one of the things that it's just an unknown until you figure it out. But as I developed influence with the local unit and then the colonel back at the main unit, I would say things like, we should do less. This guy wants to lead more. And then both of the commanders said, okay, great. We'll do less. What does he want to do? And that led to more trust building and and now I have to take that back in terms of, now here's my new action, right? I've got to, my plan is now to continue to do less, alert the governor that we're going to do less. We're going to allow you to lead, and then truly see what his plan was, which was a several month-long process. But we actually extracted a plan from the governor and then translated that back into Army so the Army could understand it.
I would add, too, not just about the specific mission that you were talking about and the specific application of action research, Pete, but to go back to something Will mentioned earlier, this is something that some scholars, I believe, have a problem with. They don't like to be the participatory aspect, I think, is unsettling to some academics, because the fact that you're in that room and you're changing things, your very presence is a treatment of sort, if you were to talk about it like a drug trial, and I just think that some scholars are a little uncomfortable with that, which is, I think, why we didn't get a lot of pushback from the military for what we were doing, but some of the pushback that I did get came from the outside world, or from the scholarly world, especially when I revealed that the job that I was going to take doing social science for the Army. I mean, I don't want to take us too far off with that one, but I wanted to throw that one in there, Will.
Oh, no, that's a great point you bring up, Rich. And I think that goes back to the roots of action research and where the field that it really developed in, which isn't a traditional academic research field, it's education, where you had teachers with a population of students that they have zero ability to control. They can put discipline, they can say, this is your left and right lateral limit, but at the end of the day, they can't control the student's actions. The student has the ability to make their own choices. So the teachers would control their own actions, observe how that impacted the student, and just go through the cycle from there. And I can definitely see how it makes traditional field researchers uncomfortable, because you're no longer studying a subject population, you're studying an interaction, which takes it into an entirely different field.
One of the other things that we should say just on the record is that when we do this research, my intention is to do as little harm as possible in a conflict zone where there's active shooting, and I was shot at in that valley. So it's not a clinical research environment. It is a live combat zone. And my job is to help that commander. Now, if I do nothing and I take the academic high road, that's an unethical play, because I have the ability to help cause less harm. Doesn't guarantee that I will, but if to act like it's some kind of immoral act, well, that's completely incorrect, because to not help, to allow these people who aren't skilled, if you're a swimming coach and you say, I can't morally teach these kids how to swim, and they're getting in the pool anyhow, you're just an asshole. I'm sorry, but a commander needs all the help they can get. And this is extremely complicated stuff, and nobody in the military is successfully trained at it. It's guys like us that sort of independently discover it, and we kind of become almost like witch doctors to the Army. So any academic that listens to this has a problem with it. At Pete A. Turner on Twitter, you can talk to me, and I'll give you the straight scoop.
Yeah.
But you're wrong.
Oh, you're weaponizing academia. Yeah, no shit. Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. So less people can die, and so maybe we can get these development projects done the right way. I'm not the one who is asking the military to engage in nation building, but if we're going to do it, let's at least do it right. Or at least, what's the title of our book, Pete? How to Fuck Up Less?
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty solid title. I think I could add to that.
Yeah.
Rich, you bring up a great point, which was originally I was going to talk about challenges during the research, but you bring up organizational challenges. So there's not only Pete trying to talk to the Army to give him the time and the patience to work with someone. You have the academic world putting pressure on you, saying this isn't quite research, or this isn't political science research as it should be, or this isn't sociology as it should be. What kind of organizational challenges have you faced within academia? And then Pete, I'll have you same question, but within working with the Army.
Will, I had on the day I defended my dissertation, I had a professor kind of half congratulate me, but said something striking when it was known that I was going to take the job with the Army. And that professor said, this is not what we trained you to do. And that really kind of blew me away. And, I guess to this day, I still don't know how to take it. The country's at war and there's a war effort. And for a scholar to say, this is not what we trained you to do. I mean, I guess I understand that perspective, but I just don't subscribe to that belief system. Here's some other organization or institutional hurdles we've had to deal with. I had an editor, as we were looking for a home for this article, I had an editor straight up say that action research is not a methodology. It's a way to solve problems. So, that was on the political science and international relations side of the fence, So it's just part of it's trying to get people to accept that, you may not think this is research, but I guess that there is a contribution that academia can make. There are some things that the social sciences can do to help, and I think a lot of that's on the development side, as well as the anthropology side, and learning about culture and learning about, economic systems and political systems. These things are very important in modern combat for every E1 with a rifle should know some basic things about the operating environment and the anthropological or the historical aspect of the operating environment. That's part of it as well. I just think that, especially with, the direction the Army's gone with training and, moving into some of this, the direction of more culture training, I think you're going to see more of this kind of stuff. And, there are 2 articles already. Will's got the first one. We got the second one forthcoming. So I think as we tell more of these stories and as we put them in print, we got this article in Action Research Journal, which is the journal for this methodology. So, I don't know if we could have done much better than that, but, I think we just got to keep writing, keep telling these stories, and keep demonstrating some of the successes.
Will, I got lost in Rich's great answer. So will you give me the question again?
Yeah, I'll just comment real quick on Rich's answer.
Okay.
What you said about needing the theoretical backdrop in order to understand things and enabling the PFC to work. If I'm doing action research and I have a social psychology background, I can identify that social identity theory is playing a role within relationships. But when I turn around and tell a captain or a U.S. aid worker, hey, social identity is playing a role and you need to shape a group identity with this guy and become more one with this guy, they're not going to know what to do with it. That's where action research comes in. It's me saying, look, I recognize social identity theory is a problem, and we got two different groups that are stereotyping each other and, at each other's necks. I can do something about it. So you're not handing it off to somebody who doesn't know what they're doing. You're following through. It's kind of like if you had a shrink who listens to you and then tells you mumbo jumbo and then doesn't follow through with seeing if it helps you. Mm-hmm. So Pete, to bring back the question, it was what organizational challenges did you face in working with different organizations overseas? I know you worked with the U.S. Army. You had experiences with like U.S. aid, with state.
Yeah.
What kind of challenges did they present to you in the execution of action research?
Well, so yeah, I mean, it doesn't work, right? Like it's so foreign that even within our own program, people didn't like how I approached the work, even though I was super successful at it. Rich and I got kicked off camps. I've been denied access to patrols. I've needed a lot of top cover. I've nearly been fired several times. And not because I was wrong. As a matter of fact, I was saved because I was right. But absolutely, get off my camp. All these things happen. So the institution itself is violently opposed to understanding more about the thing they're trying to help, which makes no sense, but that is reality. And then there's a vertical myopic way of looking at each other's partners. So if Rich is subordinate to us in terms of his partner being somewhere in the government at a higher provincial level, and then you or I are at the district, it's a good chance that there's a negative perception of our district partner, but that also would go up to the provincial partner for Rich, and we would think each other's partner was an asshole without ever cross-talking and going, why do we think this? So there's our own hierarchy problems where we have completely unrealistic expectations of people and what we understand and what we can influence. We really come in like a teenager that's had too much booze and is just going to fight or fuck something. And I hate to be so crude, but that really is what it's like. No training, not listening, absolutely imposing will on whatever it can impose will on. And so that's the problem with the organization, is that this form of clarity, this form of understanding is delicate. It's founded in mistakes, and it doesn't look like shooting somebody in the face. And so people typically in the military or in State Department or in USAID reject it on the face because it's so different from what they do.
Right. It takes the key part of any action research utilization is that I'm going to call it the final step, but really you can jump into the process at any time. But the reflection, and from my experience, it sounds like your experience is similar. The military was cool with the planning part. They were cool with the taking action part. And they were all right with the observation part, because that's basically an after-action review.
Yeah.
You're basically coming up with a plan, executing a mission, and doing an AAR. But most AARs aren't truly transformative or aren't truly done with the goal of changing how you're acting or enabling you to do a better job next time. It's in theory they are, but a lot of times there's not that follow-through. And action research, it takes that follow-through. So like you said at the very beginning, Pete, it's a process that you were doing without even knowing you're doing it.
Yeah.
And a lot of organizations, the military in particular, they do action researchy stuff every single day. They just don't quite take that step to complete the cycle and make it a transformative process that improves their ability to conduct business.
Let me give a couple of practical examples of this, because this is how you do this. So when I was new to a unit, I would watch how, whether I got there or they got there, I would watch how they communicated in PowerPoint slides and how they accounted for the human domain. And inevitably, you don't see it because no one's trained them to think about that. They talk about what they're going to do, not how they're going to do it. So you would see, like, we're going to go out and inoculize people. And then next week, we're going to inoculize sheep. And then we're going to go out and we're going to install a well. Then we're going to paint a building. And all of this stuff was done without, it was a very culturally dumb, socially dumb program. It was just do these things and then we win. By staying in the same area and watching unit after unit come in and do that, I learned to read what wasn't there on the slide. And so then you go into planning meetings and people are having these plans and these ideas. And I would start to do action research when I would hear a major stand up and say, we need to do this. And then that's my cue to go, okay, the last unit, heck, the last 4 units had the same thought. Here are their slides. What are we going to do differently? And that moment right there, the what are we going to do differently is you have to be a senior officer. Junior officers don't take that well. And because I've done this with like the thing called radio in a box, the rehab. And you know, like we're going to put out messages. And I swear to God, every unit would come in and say, and then we will take a brown hand and a white hand and they will join on a PowerPoint slide. And it's like, good fucking God, how many of those slides do we need to realize that doesn't work? You know, I don't know what does, but that doesn't work. So part of my rules of thumb were watch how they communicated in slides. When I heard good ideas come out, start to that's where I had to do some research and go, let me look into that and let's see what the last unit's done if I didn't already have those slides ready to go. And then the other thing was do not provide ideas. Your ego pushes you to say, how about we try this? But I would refuse to do it until the colonel's like, no, I need you to tell me what you think we need to do. Because otherwise the staff would undermine me because I was doing their job by myself and coming up with ideas. So those are all individual action research, little small loops like you were talking about, where you're just trying to sew up things and get them to make that mistake less.
Right. And this is a sidebar, but I love the rehab comment you have with radio in a box. We had, if we're looking at the 4-step process of action research and just in general, the military would plan with the rehab and they would put it into action.
This episode of the Break It Down Show is brought to you by Lions Rock Productions.
That's us.
We publish, evaluate, and develop podcasts just like this one, consult others to build their own, and create associated content and content marketing strategies.
So if you're launching or expanding your social media presence, your business, or your personal brand, or if you just want to take your media presence to the next level,
reach out to us on Twitter
at Pete A. Turner
or at JohnLG69
at the Break It Down Show.
There's 1,000 ways to get a hold of us.
Now enjoy the show.
The military would plan with the rehab and they would put it into action. And then they would say, all right, it's on the radio waves. We're done. So let's just, good things are going to happen. It blew my mind how there was never any follow through. They weren't enabling PSYOP guys or information operations guys to go out and actually see what is being listened to or how are people reacting. Or if the Army was doing it, it was happening on a unique individual basis. It wasn't an organizational effort. My personal experience, we had our rehab, but the unit I was supporting refused to allow Pashto as the language for what they were broadcasting, and they only used Dari. And we noticed that we only had Dari speakers coming to the district center whenever we would announce like an event that was going to occur at the district center. So we went out and talked to people, observed that the Pashto speaking community was saying, when we hear Dari, you're not talking to me. So then we reflected on it and said, maybe we should use 2 languages. And we threw it right back into the planning cycle, and we started using Dari and Pashto and put it into action. And within a couple of weeks, we started seeing it was a trickle at first, but eventually it became a decent flow of people from areas that the district governor had never spoken to before, because those people had never come to the district governor.
Yeah, that's a measure of affect. You are creating a desired response. You're creating the response of get up out of my chair and participate in the government, even to reject it. But they're doing something different than ever before, as opposed to looking at the radio and saying it broadcast out in a 1.5 mile concentric circle, which is how it's typically briefed, is what is its capability, not its ability to create motion in the populace. Because that's really what we're trying to do ultimately, is because we are technically nation building, we're trying to get people to believe in the government. And if you can stack wins where people are moving towards the government, I'm going to outperform anybody that focuses on what their radio does.
Yeah, absolutely. Within our conversation, I've noticed we've talked about action research being used at like different levels. So I was going to see if Pete, you were just talking about at kind of, I'll say a mid-level organization where it was battalion and brigade level commands trying to get, that 25-meter target of this is what we want to do and this is who we need to work it through, and it needs to be a group effort. I was wondering, Rich, do you have any examples, or maybe not examples of you doing it, but examples of opportunities where you see action research could be applied at a more macro level within kind of like the strategic level, if you had been at a division staff in Afghanistan, and how they might have utilized action research?
I think on this, let me see. I think one thing that I would like to see is, let's say at the level of Guerrero, all the way up with the kind of stuff we did one-on-one with the district governor. I don't see how, now maybe you're not going to have, this is State Department's domain. You got ambassadors who are running around working with high-level government officials. But, if there was, I think with particular development projects, and I'll stick, for example, let's go with the rehab, because that radio was helping pump out the radio literacy program. Okay, so I'll stick with that. We're talking about the ability to provide public education to your population, right? So if we're going to we're going to engage in nation building and state building, we at least need a semi-literate population. I don't see why you can't take what we did at the individual level, working with our district governor, and broaden that to, at the level of an entire initiative, let's say a countrywide education initiative, broken out into the different, looking at the different provinces. And it would obviously take it would take teams of people to do this, but I think at the highest level, if at least you've got somebody who in the room who can look at this as a systematic process, I believe coming back to that, at the last stage, at that reflection point, like, let's test our assumptions. Let's see what worked, what didn't work, and then I keep going back to let's test our own assumptions. What knowledge have we put into this plan? We did the action, we've observed. Now, how do we fix it? Where do we go wrong? Where do we go right?
That's great. That makes me think about when people stop believing that they have an influence on an activity, kind of like that. Once you hit launch, it's gone. The rocket's gone. Action research is kind of a rejection of that. You hit launch and you still can shape where that rocket's going. It always kind of blew my mind how influential the sunk cost fallacy, that idea that we're already doing this, so we have to continue. And action research just kind of says, no, we can change.
Well, it would take a commitment at the level of policymakers, and not just in, like in Afghanistan or, even in Iraq or other conflict areas, at the policy level. There's got to be a commitment to changing course if what we're doing is not working. But unfortunately, as the policy process plays out, there's always kind of the impulse to stay with the status quo. And I think you were hitting on this, Will, is action research is going to reject that, because the status quo, well, in Afghanistan, go back to the paper, status quo wasn't working.
One of the times when action research works in this level, and this is more mid-level example, but there's definitely, I can give another example of division, but I don't know that it's relevant because this is the example. So the military, State Department, all these guys, they're programmed on doing things. So there was a set of windmills, vertical windmills, that pumped water from the Tigris into the farm areas. Now, farmers in Iraq have very little problem getting water out of the river. They do it every day. It's not a thing. But someone got the idea of if this was wind powered, it would be, I don't know, better for the environment or some reason. Anyhow, because these things are hardly ever simple, there was a Scottish vendor that won the contract, and they couldn't fulfill that contract reliably for whatever reason. Every battalion commander that came through became obsessed with these windmills because it was a problem they knew they should be able to fix. And so I would watch them obsess about it and not spend a lot of time, but spend time, valuable time in a combat zone during their command trying to fix something that, frankly, didn't need to be fixed. And so the last commander I was working with, he's like, I'm going to be goddamned if I'm not going to fix those things. And I'm like, sir, have you seen the gigantic Chevy motors that pump water out of the Tigris right next to those windmills? And he's like, yes, I've seen those. And I'm like, have you seen the last three colonels try to fix this problem that originates in Scotland? And he's like, yeah, I think I get where you're going with this. And I'm like, you've got maybe 4 months left here. Are those windmills going to be doing anything in 5 months, in 6 months? Is anyone ever going to even see them? Does it matter? Or could we do something else with that time? And it was through that reflection that we were able to get him to say, fuck those windmills. They don't mean anything to me. But that's how compelled everybody is to fix these problems. They see it as a failure on their own part instead of saying, like, that's already failed, or this actually doesn't get me closer to my win. A lot of what Rich and I do is, help them fuck up less. Focusing on those windmills was not going to, in any significant way, provide a positive impact on that region. If anything, they would have taken them apart and sold them for scrap, because that was their most value. They already can get water out. They don't care about the environment. They want more water. Can you make more water happen? A passive windmill pump system was not and made no sense in terms of how they managed water there. So there's an example of action research and the ability to see all of the mistakes stack up, and you go, not focusing on this is not a mistake. This is actually something that's done, and my battalion's no longer going to put any effort into this. Fuck that guy in Scotland.
How many times did the commanders do the exact same thing without knowing that their predecessor had taken the exact same steps to try to get this thing to work?
Right, exactly. At least 3 battalion commanders that I knew of, and probably a 4th, because that project was about 3 years old, and that's how fast they rotate through. They don't have the ability to have all of that knowledge. And if anything, when the commander briefs it, oh yeah, here's the windmills, here's the problem, see if you can fix it. Bye-bye. Right? And so now it's like left as this thing that has to be solved instead of this thing that really was irrelevant.
Right. And that's where action research, in my opinion, would be extremely powerful, whether you're dealing with an individual or a large scale project like windmills. It's what makes it systematic is taking notes and in that journal as you go through everything. Journal your successes, journaling your failures, making sure you outline what changes you make. That way, if it were in the United States and you were doing action research, you would be able to see it through. But when you're overseas with the military, your replacement's coming, and you're going to have 2 or 3 days with your replacement, and then you're gone and he's left to figure it out. It's that journaling through the process that enables that continuity of the learning to continue regardless of whether it's the same person doing the action research throughout the evolution of problem.
Will, that's an individual level application that I think some of the listeners might think, oh, well, yeah, that's simple. But you can't overstate how valuable just taking notes can be. That continuity bit. That's what your action research paper was about, Will. That social continuity is so important. And we too often waste too much time simply because we didn't take notes or those notes were not passed along.
Right. The next question then is, how do we take action research and move forward with it, either with the military as they're doing, stability operations, or with other governmental organizations, USAID, or with different companies, private companies? How do we take action research and get it into their organizational culture so that the failure that is required as part of action research becomes acceptable and part of an improvement process?
I mean, the obvious answer, for the military application is it's training. It starts with doctrine. We've got doctrine that basically says that the military is involved with promoting governance. When the doctrine mentions words like rule of law, that in the stability operations, that as a political scientist, you're talking about rule of law, I'm interested. So we've got things like that written in doctrine that then trickle its way down into operations and training and planning and operations. So I think that's the way to start, is at the level of doctrine, so that it finds its way into training. You gotta have an open mind to do this stuff in the first place. So, even in your recruitment phase, when you're trying to recruit officers and you're trying to, recruit even enlisted personnel, you gotta it takes a certain kind of person to be open to using these kind of methodologies.
Right. The pessimist in me views it as the Army might not be too open to something like action research because you're literally journaling someone's failures.
Yeah.
So if you are a lieutenant colonel wanting to see colonel, you might not want to be keeping a journal of your failures unless you can get to the success and someone will notice that.
And
difficult.
And you certainly don't want some analysts going over your journals.
Yeah.
Right.
But that is a key point, though, Will, is the reflection phase really is a time to identify the improvements that can be made. If we're to take it and put it in the positive, these are the areas, because what we don't want is someone, a unit to say, and now we will reflect. Reflection time done, because we've all been to AARs where it's simply something you have to do and there is no impact from it. Like something to keep, something to change, whatever. And then you go to the next one, you're like, we didn't change anything from the last time. Are we just going to say these words? Because what happens then is when I was in the Army, we would do something called Sergeant's Time every Thursday in Europe. And so we would stop and learn some aspect of our job. It was a really great idea. And then we would do the AAR afterwards. And every week I would say, gosh, this is some of the best Sergeant's Time I think we've ever conducted. Every week I would say the same thing. And only the knuckleheads got it because they all heard it over and over again. The leaders heard thanks because they designed the training. So all that was really happened was I was just fluffing them and making jokes they couldn't hear with my boys. So it can't be that. They have to be comfortable with, and I like to use the word miscomfort, the miscomfort of knowing that mistakes are a good outcome from this process. Look, you should have things to improve. And
I'm going to jump in, Pete, because you just hit on something we've talked about before, is you're going to have some kind of change within the military, because right now you got a promotion system, to my knowledge, that's still based upon how often are you winning?
Yeah.
How much stuff are you doing? So it's going to be hard to, you got to get people to accept that failure might not be always a bad thing. You got to record this stuff. But, if this, like Will was saying earlier too, if this even threatens somebody's promotion potential, you're going to have problems. So.
Yeah, it becomes a real problem. The other thing I wanted to say too is by doing action research, you're allowed to take something that's very complicated. And one of the things that Rich and I advised our last brigade we worked with was to do less. And the colonel who ran that brigade said, listen to what these guys are saying. We don't want a bunch of stuff we did. We want to get a couple of things right. And he had been around long enough to be comfortable with that. So identifying where the work is, not the outcome. So if it's filling the task skill, okay, great. You want to fill government billets with your governor. Well, how do we get that done? You don't just bug the governor to hire people. You figure out, well, who would he hire first? What position? What things does he need to have in sight? So you can understand his decision-making process and understand that at some point, okay, yeah, I think it's time. Like, now I have these things in place. Now I can hire somebody. But if you just go out there and bug the person, hire somebody, you might accomplish the goal of getting someone hired for a ministry position, but you've utterly failed in creating any kind of governance or stability or sustainable wins. It's a forced win that looks great on an OER, but looks horrible when Pete and Rich come out and start asking questions.
Yeah, I think it's more important in some situations. Well, no, in the situation you just mentioned, and I, you're referencing back to the paper here. Why don't we figure out why this guy hasn't hired anybody? Let's figure out why he's having a hard time getting, some government workers up here, because that might actually give us an inroads into, well, understanding governance, first of all, understanding how he governs, second of all, but also now we've started to build some rapport with the guy,
I had something in my head, and then Rich's story got me on track because I was getting into it. So the why really seems like it's one of the most important parts of any social research within a military context is really understanding the why. But like you hinted at, Rich, it takes time. And while you were talking, the words that came to me were whoever's conducting action research needs patience. They need tactical patience, they need operational patience, and they need strategic patience. And that, to me, that's one of the biggest challenges for implementing action research is asking people to be patient.
Can I add to that? Because what you're saying, there's other elements of that I think give commanders another way of looking at it. Informal structures, informal rule of law, informal governance is hard to see, and you have to let your eyes adjust to that. There's a darkness there, and if you don't have the patience to do that, and you can't do that unless you're building trust all the time. So all of these sub skills have to be established. So how do you build trust with someone you don't know, who doesn't speak your language, doesn't have your religion, doesn't? If you can't build trust, then you have no hope of effectively partnering. If you can't work an interpreter right, you can't. So all of these things allow you to speed up that tactical, operational, strategic proficiency. But without those things, you can certainly do things that are tactical, but they'll have no relevance to your ability to create a reliable win on the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. The quick wins are not enduring wins, and enduring wins require, like you were saying, Pete, trust. You have to build trust before you can get the DGov to do something that you want him to do. And it builds up from the ground up. And action research can be involved throughout, whether it's interpersonal or organizational behaviors that are being adapted and transformed.
Any unit that wants to be adept at any kind of cultural based thing, any kind of non-lethal thing, I would encourage you to reach out to Rich, Will, or myself. We're glad to help anybody get a better grip on what this looks like, because there are things you can actually do to improve your unit's capability to do these things. I've been through enough units. I've seen it done. They get better at this. It's just how soon can you start to put these skills together? We extracted one district governor's plan, and the unit's like, great, we're going to get that for everybody we're partnered with. And they started extracting plans. It doesn't mean they did it great, and I didn't do it perfect the first time, but you do get better at it once you know that my partner has a plan that I can support and get wins when I have to do nothing. Okay, I'll do that. And so it does happen. It's just a matter of you have to understand the skills that lie underneath, and action research is a great way to approach these problems. And I think that what your paper did too, Will, it's fantastic in taking this conversation and expanding it.
Thanks, Pete. Yeah, I don't know where to go from there, because that you just put a bow on everything. Yeah, as far as where I see action research moving forward within the military, specifically for the Army, it's hard to really see an application for action research within that the near peer modern warfare with robots and everything. It could be used there at a planning level, definitely. But I think action research is something that could be implemented today in operations that are ongoing through all of the U.S.'s partnering operations, whether they are conventional guys who are now partnered in Afghanistan with conventional Afghan army guys just trying to improve their day-to-day interactions, or special operations guys who are in Mali or Nigeria or all across South America. The action research is a systematic way for them to not only improve their how they do their job, but to hand it off to the follow-on guy, the next guy. That way, lessons learned aren't individual.
Yeah, I think you could start putting this in to the curriculum down there at Fort Benning, the Military Advisor Training Academy they just opened up.
Yeah, I've actually talked to them a couple of times, and they're always interested, but there's always pushback because there's not patience in the curriculum development to understand what's going on for how action research can be important. Because it's a hard sell to say, hey, you've got a horse blanket with 150 hours in it, and you've got 165 hours of training already. Can I tell you how to help guys think about doing things? But it is a single skill set that could impact every other skill set.
Well, listen, we've nerded out long enough on this. I mean, hope everybody can appreciate there's some high-level talk going on, and maybe this podcast won't be for everybody, but it does join up nicely with this paper that's about to get published. And the point is to give context to folks that, maybe we'll save some lives. Maybe we'll do 10 less stupid things per unit going forward, those that have this and can start to develop some training. And I appreciate the audience bearing with us because it's nerdy stuff, but this is how we start to nudge the ball strategically towards getting better at these things. Because if we don't do this, then I don't know what else we do to get better if we're not going to allow ourselves to slow down long enough to build trust, make mistakes, and learn from those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Stupid stuff is going to happen no matter what. You might as well learn from it.